Samuel Richardson figured he was already a dead man. He just hadn't stopped breathing yet. The sky over northern Colorado was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy and mean. Snow hadn't just been falling. It was a punishment from God, a thick white curtain trying to smother the world. The wind screamed through the pines, and it sounded like it was hungry. Samuel had been chopping wood for hours. His hands were numb inside his gloves, but he didn't stop. He was 42, a man made of sharp edges and silence. Grief had carved him out, left him hollow. He'd learned the hard way that the only thing you could trust in this world was distance. His cabin was his fortress, boarded-up windows, a heavy door. It wasn't a home. It was a place to hide from memories, hide from the 2 small gravestones in Millbrook Cemetery, the ones with the names Rachel and Thomas carved into them. His wife, his son, 5 years. 5 years since the fever had burned through their little bodies and left him alone. The cabin was his sanctuary and his prison. Here, nobody could pity him. Nobody could ask him when he was going to move on. You don't move on from an amputation. You just learn to live with the missing pieces. He hefted the axe. The cold air burned his lungs. He was about to bring it down, split another log, when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong, not a branch snapping, not a wolf howling. It was human. Samuel froze. Every muscle in his body went tight. His heart hammered against his ribs. Out here, visitors meant one thing: trouble, lost prospectors, starving trappers, or worse, men with dark eyes and darker intentions. He'd built his life on being impossible to find. The sound came again, closer, the crunch of boots in deep snow. But it was wrong. Too slow. Too clumsy. He grabbed the axe, knuckles white. He turned toward the trees, his eyes scanning the endless white. And then he saw her. She came out of the storm like a bad dream. A woman, young, maybe 25. She was stumbling, fighting through snow that came up to her knees. Her hair was long and black, plastered to her face. Her skin was a warm brown, flushed red with a deadly cold. But it was her feet that made Samuel's blood run cold. She was barefoot. Her feet were raw, blue, and bleeding against the pure white snow. She was wearing a dress that had once been beautiful, something for a ceremony, with fancy beadwork. Now it was torn, stained, useless against the cold. She walked like she was already a ghost, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking so hard he could see it from 50 yards away. Samuel just stood there, axe in hand, frozen by the sight. She took another step, her leg buckling, then another. He could see the frostbite creeping up her toes, angry and red. She looked up, and her eyes found his. It wasn't a look of desperation. It wasn't a plea for help. It was something harder, something that judged him. She was looking at him like he was the last man on earth, and he had to decide if he was an angel or a devil. She took 3 more steps, and then she collapsed, face first, into the snow. Samuel dropped the axe. He didn't think. He just ran. His boots sank into the powder, his mind screaming a single word: trap. It had to be a trap. Raiders used women as bait, luring soft-hearted men into an ambush. But when he reached her, when he rolled her over and saw the blue tint of her lips, the violent, uncontrollable shivers racking her small frame, he knew. This was no trap. This was a woman dying right in front of him. Her breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. He knelt beside her, his mind going cold and practical, the way it did during the war. Severe hypothermia, advanced frostbite. She had an hour, maybe less. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a rusty croak from disuse. "Can you hear me?" She forced her head up. Her dark eyes struggled to focus on his face. When she spoke, her voice was almost silent, but the words were sharp as broken glass. "I'm freezing," she whispered. "Let me in. I beg you." She paused, her teeth chattering. "I'll reward you." The word struck him as odd, so formal, so proud even now. He looked into her eyes and saw she wasn't offering what he thought. It wasn't about money or favors. She was offering him the only thing she had left to give, her life, her gratitude. "I can reward you," she said again, the words barely forming. "Please." He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. Whatever she'd done, whoever she was, she didn't deserve to die like a stray dog in the snow. He scooped her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, as if she were made of nothing but bone and cold. She didn't speak again as he carried her toward the cabin, but her eyes never left his face. She was watching him, measuring him. And for the first time in 5 long years, Samuel Richardson felt like he was being seen. The heat of the cabin was like a physical blow. Samuel had the fire roaring, and the small room was a pocket of life in the middle of a dead world. He laid her down gently on the rug by the hearth. The ice in her clothes and hair immediately began to melt, little clouds of steam rising from her body. He moved with an old, practiced efficiency. He piled every blanket he owned on top of her shivering form. He rushed to the stove, put a kettle on to boil. Her eyes followed his every move. She was still calculating. Was he a savior, or just a different kind of monster? "Your feet," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We need to warm them slowly, or you'll lose them." She gave a tiny nod, a movement that seemed to cost her everything. He knelt beside her. Her feet were a mess, white and red, swollen and angry, but they weren't black, not yet. There was still a chance. He poured hot water into a basin, testing it with his own hand. Too hot would be just as bad as the cold. He added snow until it was lukewarm, then gently, so gently, he lifted her feet and submerged them. She let out a strangled gasp, her back arching off the floor, but she didn't scream. She bit her lip so hard he saw a bead of blood well up. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts. But we have to do it." He massaged her frozen toes, his touch careful, coaxing the life back into them. He worked with a grim focus, knowing this was a battle against time. Slowly, gradually, a little bit of color started to return. While he worked, he studied her face. She was beautiful, but it was a hard beauty, shaped by things no woman her age should have to endure. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that held a terrible ancient knowledge. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated for a long moment. "Ayana," she said, her voice still rough. "I'm Samuel." She nodded, then closed her eyes as another fit of shivering seized her. He kept working on her feet, his hands steady. He'd learned a thing or two about frostbite in the war. He'd also learned how close to death a person could get, and still come back. "You walked a long way," he stated. It wasn't a question. 3 days, she whispered without opening her eyes. "Maybe 4, I don't remember." Samuel's hands stopped moving for a second. 3 days, barefoot, in a blizzard like this. It was impossible. She should be dead 10 times over. The fact that she was here, breathing in his cabin, spoke of a will to live that was almost supernatural. "Where did you come from?" Ayana's eyes snapped open. They were clear and sharp, and they pinned him in place. "I was cast out," she said, her voice flat and empty. "Sent into the storm to die." The words hung in the small cabin. Samuel had heard stories, brutal tribal justice for those who brought shame. But hearing it was one thing. Seeing the result, this broken, freezing woman on his floor, was another. It made his stomach turn. "Why?" he asked, though a part of him didn't want to know. "I could not give him children," Ayana said. The pain in her voice was old and deep. "I was wife to Chief Black Horse for 3 winters. Every season I failed. Every season his anger grew. He said I was cursed. The tribe believed him." Samuel's mind raced. He'd seen enough of the world to know that the official story was never the whole story. Powerful men always found someone else to blame for their own failings. "You're sure it was you?" he asked carefully. Her eyes flashed. "I carried a child once, before him. I was young. The boy I loved was young too. The baby came too soon. It did not live." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one knew. Only me." Samuel nodded slowly. So that was it. She wasn't barren. The chief was, and he had sentenced her to death to hide his own shame. The sheer injustice of it lit a fire in Samuel's chest, a hot, familiar rage he hadn't felt in years. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Ayana studied his face, as if surprised by the sincerity. "You are not like the other white men," she said quietly. Samuel almost laughed. "I'm not like most men, period." He finished with her feet and moved to her hands. They were bad, but not as bad. He rubbed them gently, bringing the feeling back. All the while, he kept a respectful distance. He wanted her to know she was safe here. "You saved my life," she said suddenly. He looked up, met her gaze. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said, and her voice was filled with a terrible certainty. They would not have. The conviction in that one word told him more than her entire story. He could suddenly imagine her journey. The doors slammed in her face. The people who saw her, freezing and desperate, and just turned away. The world was a cruel, cold place. He knew that better than anyone. It's why he'd come here, to this empty stretch of mountain, to get away from it. "Well," he said gruffly, "you're here now. That's all that matters." Ayana watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes," she whispered, mostly to herself. "I am here." But Samuel had a sinking feeling in his gut. The story wasn't over. A chief powerful enough to cast his wife out to die wasn't the kind of man to leave things to chance. He had a feeling Ayana hadn't just escaped her past. She had brought it right to his door. The storm was a wild beast, clawing at the little cabin for 3 straight days. It trapped them inside, 2 strangers in a space barely big enough for one. Samuel had forgotten what it was like to have another person around. The small sounds, the shared silence. It was unsettling. But Ayana was easy to be with. She was quiet, but not scared. She moved with a strange grace, a dignity that seemed impossible after what she'd been through. On the second morning, Samuel woke up and she was already awake. She was sitting by the fire, soaking her feet. She'd somehow managed to wash her torn dress, even stitch up the worst of the rips. Her hair was clean and woven into a thick, neat braid. She looked less like a victim, and more like a queen in exile. "How are the feet?" he asked, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "Better," she said, wiggling her toes. "The feeling is coming back." He nodded, relieved. He'd been worried about infection, about the tissue dying. But she was healing with a speed that was almost unnatural. "You're strong," he said, more to himself than to her. She looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her dark eyes. "I had to be. Weakness is a death sentence where I come from." He wanted to ask more, to know what kind of life forges a person into steel like this. But he didn't. He knew some doors were better left unopened. Instead, he asked the question that had been nagging at him. "What will you do when the storm breaks?" Ayana stared into the fire. The flames danced in her eyes. "I do not know," she said at last. "I have no one, nowhere to go. My people have cast me out. To them, I am already a ghost." The thought of her walking back out into that frozen wilderness alone sent a sharp pang through Samuel's chest. It was an unwelcome feeling, a dangerous one. "You could stay," he heard himself say. The words were out before he could stop them. "There's room, if you want." She turned her head slowly and looked right at him. Her gaze was intense, searching. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want that?" It was a fair question. Why? He had spent 5 years building walls around his heart. He had perfected the art of being alone. And now, this woman, this stranger, made him want to tear it all down. Because, he said, the truth tasting strange on his tongue, I've been alone for a long time, maybe too long. Ayana didn't look away. She seemed to be weighing his soul in her hands. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. I will think on it. That afternoon, he did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He spoke their names aloud. Rachel. Thomas. He told Ayana about his wife, about the way she could find beauty in anything. He told her about his son, a boy he'd only known for a few short months. The fever, he said, staring into the flames as if he could see their faces there. It came through town like a thief in the night. Took the baby first. Rachel got it nursing him. There was nothing I could do. I just watched them go. Ayana listened, her silence a comfort. You loved them, she said softly. I did, he whispered. I thought I'd never love anything again. The words hung in the air. He hadn't meant to say that, but she had a way of pulling the truth out of him. Love is not a cup that can be emptied, Ayana said, her voice quiet but sure. It is a fire. The more you share it, the brighter it burns. He looked at her then, at the ancient wisdom in her young eyes. Is that Apache wisdom? She gave him the smallest of smiles. It is a woman's wisdom. It is the same in every language. That night, as they ate, she asked him about his life before. He told her about the war, about the farm he and Rachel had built, about their dreams of a house full of children. You came here to hide, she said when he was finished. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. I came here to survive, he corrected. Sometimes they are the same thing, she said gently. But you are not hiding anymore. He wasn't so sure, but for the first time he hoped she was right. There was something stirring in him, a feeling he had long since buried. It wasn't just wanting her. It was a deeper need, a need for connection, a need to not be the only person in the world who knew his story. As they got ready for bed, Ayana stood by his cot. I am not used to sleeping alone, she said. In my husband's lodge, the sounds of the family were all around. This silence, it is too loud. Samuel knew what she meant. In his first few months here, the silence had almost driven him mad. You can sleep here, he said, moving over. I won't. I promise I won't touch you. She looked at his face, saw the truth there, and nodded. She lay down beside him, not touching, but the warmth of her body next to his was a profound comfort. It was more than he had felt in years. Samuel, she whispered in the dark. Yes, thank you, for not seeing me as a burden. He turned his head on the pillow. Thank you, he whispered back, for reminding me I'm more than just a ghost. He closed his eyes, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. But just as he was drifting off to sleep, he heard a sound from outside, a soft crunch of snow. He told himself it was just the storm, an animal, a branch falling, but a cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. The storm was loud, a howling monster, but this sound had been quiet, deliberate. It was the sound of a footstep. He lay there, perfectly still, listening. He didn't want to alarm her, but he knew. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. They weren't alone. The chief hadn't left his wife's fate to the gods of the storm. He had sent someone to make sure the job was finished. Samuel had opened his door to a dying woman, and in doing so, he had just invited a war into his home. The storm broke on the 4th day. The world outside was silent, buried under 6 feet of snow. It was beautiful and deadly. The trails would be impassable for days. For a little while, they were safe, but the peace felt fragile, temporary. Samuel had spent the night awake, listening. He'd heard nothing more. but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. It was a cold spot on the back of his neck. Ayana stood by the window, looking out at the glittering snow. She was healing fast. Her strength was remarkable. But there was a shadow in her eyes, a constant, low-level fear. "I have been thinking," she said, without turning around, "about your offer. To stay." Samuel's chest tightened. "I would like to accept," she said quietly, "but I cannot. It is not safe for you." "What are you talking about?" he asked, though he already knew. She finally turned to face him. The fear in her eyes was sharp now. "I did not tell you the whole truth, Samuel. I was not just cast out. I ran." "You ran from what?" "From him, from Black Horse. He did not just send me into the storm, he sent men after me, to hunt me down, to make sure I never speak of what I know." So there it was. The other shoe had dropped. "What is it you know?" Ayana took a deep breath. "Black Horse is not the true chief. He took power by force. My family, they were the rightful leaders. He married me to make his rule seem legitimate, but the people still whisper. They still remember my grandfather." She looked away, her voice dropping. "And there is more. He is selling our sacred lands, the wintering grounds. He is selling them to the railroad men for guns and whiskey." Samuel felt a cold fury wash over him. It was an old story. Greed. Betrayal. "He could not risk me telling the other elders," Ayana continued. "He used my curse as an excuse. The tribe is starving. They are scared. They believed his lies because they were desperate. So the men he sent, they are his most loyal warriors. They will not stop until they find my body. They think the storm killed me. But when they find no trace, they will keep looking. And they will find this cabin." The quiet sanctuary he had built for himself was about to become a battleground. He should have been angry. He should have told her to leave. But looking at her, at the quiet courage in her face, he felt something else entirely. A fierce, protective instinct. He had failed to protect his first family. He would not fail again. "Let them come," Samuel said, his voice a low growl. "This is my land. They are not welcome here." For the first time since she'd arrived, Ayana's lips curved into a true smile. "You are either a very brave man, Samuel Richardson, or a very foolish one." "Probably a little of both," he admitted. They spent the next 2 days in a tense state of preparation. They were trapped by the snow, but so were the hunters. It was a temporary ceasefire. Samuel took inventory of his weapons, a Winchester rifle, a shotgun, and his old service revolver. He had enough ammunition for a small war. He showed Ayana how to load and fire the shotgun. Her hands were steady. She learned fast. He secured the windows, reinforcing the boards. He barricaded the back door. The cabin was small, but it was built from thick logs. It could withstand a siege. For a while, in the evenings, they talked. The looming danger seemed to have broken down the last of their walls. He found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken of to anyone. Not just about Rachel and Thomas, but about the man he was before them. The man he was during the war, the things he had seen, the things he had done. She in turn told him about her life, about the traditions of her people, the songs, the stories. She spoke of Black Horse not with hatred, but with a kind of sad pity. A small man made vicious by his own insecurity. In those 2 days, they stopped being a man and a woman thrown together by chance. They became partners, allies. On the 3rd day after the storm, Samuel was checking his perimeter, walking the tree line in his snowshoes. And he saw it. A track. Not his, not from an animal. It was the distinct print of a moccasin, half filled with fresh snow, but it was there. And another one a few feet away. They were already here. Watching. Waiting. He raced back to the cabin, his heart pounding. "They're here," he said as he burst through the door. 2 of them, at least. "They're scouting." Ayana's face went pale, but her eyes were steady. She picked up the shotgun. The waiting was the worst part. The sun went down. The world outside went dark and silent. Every creak of the cabin, every pop of the fire made them jump. They sat in the dark, one at each window, watching, listening. Hours passed. Nothing. Maybe they are waiting for morning, Ayana whispered. Maybe, Samuel said. But he didn't believe it. These were hunters. The night was their friend. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the woods, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He raised the Winchester to his shoulder, sighting down the long barrel. He could make out a man's shape, wrapped in furs, moving silently through the deep snow. The man stopped about 100 yards out. He raised something to his lips. A low, haunting sound echoed through the frozen valley. The call of a wolf. And from the other side of the cabin, an answering call. They were surrounded. "How many?" Samuel whispered. "That was Kale's call," Ayana said, her voice tight. "He is Black Horse's war leader. If he is here, he did not come alone." Suddenly, a torch flared to life in the darkness. Then another, and another. All around the cabin, a circle of fire bloomed in the night. They were trapped. Samuel counted at least 10 torches, 10 men, maybe more. This wasn't a hunting party. This was an army. A voice called out, speaking in the Apache language. Ayana stiffened beside him. "What did he say?" Samuel asked. "That is Kyle," she translated, her voice trembling slightly. "He says the woman who shamed her husband must be given to them. He says the white man who shelters her has one chance to live. Open the door. Send me out." "Tell him to go to hell," Samuel growled. Ayana took a shaky breath and shouted a reply back into the night. A tense silence followed. Then Kale's voice came again, harder this time. "He says the blood of the white man is now on your hands. He says they will burn the cabin and drag your bones from the ashes." Samuel looked at Ayana in the flickering firelight. The fear was still in her eyes, but it was mixed with something else now. Defiance. "They think this will be easy," Samuel said, a grim smile touching his lips. "They've made a mistake." He had spent 5 years hiding from the world, hiding from his past. But tonight, the past had come for him, and he was done running. He felt a strange calm settle over him. He wasn't just a grieving farmer anymore. He was something else, something older and more dangerous. The first shot came from the darkness, splintering the wood next to the window. The siege had begun. The night exploded. Gunfire ripped through the silence, bullets thudding into the thick log walls of the cabin. Samuel shoved Ayana to the floor, crouching beside her as wood splinters flew through the air. "They have rifles!" he yelled over the noise. "Winchesters by the sound of it." "Black Horse's warriors use bows!" Ayana yelled back, her face pressed to the rough floorboards. "Only Kale carries a rifle." "Then there are more than just your people out there." This changed everything. An Apache war party was one thing, but warriors armed with repeating rifles? That meant Black Horse had powerful friends, friends with money, the railroad men she mentioned. This wasn't just a tribal matter anymore. This was about land and greed, and Samuel was caught right in the middle. A bullet punched through one of the boarded-up windows and buried itself in the wall just above their heads. "We can't stay here," Samuel said. "They'll tear this place apart." He crawled towards the hearth, the only part of the cabin made of stone. "Get to the fireplace!" They huddled behind the heavy stone chimney as the cabin was peppered with shots. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and scorched wood. "We need a plan," Ayana said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They will try to burn us out." "I know." Samuel was already thinking, his mind racing. "They think we're trapped. We can use that." He looked at her. "You know these men. You know this Kale." What kind of man is he? He is a man of honor, she said without hesitation. He follows the old ways. He believes he is doing what is right for the tribe. He believes I am a traitor. Can you reason with him? Tell him the truth about Black Horse? She shook her head sadly. His loyalty to the chief is absolute. Words will not sway him, only strength. All right, Samuel said. Strength it is. He peeked around the edge of the fireplace. The shooting had subsided for a moment. They were likely reloading or repositioning. They'll make a rush for the door or the windows. Try to set the fire. He handed her his revolver. You know how to use this? She nodded, taking the heavy pistol in both hands. Stay here. Don't shoot unless they break through. I'm going to give them a surprise. Before she could protest, he was gone, crawling silently across the floor into the darkest corner of the cabin, where a small trap door was hidden under a bearskin rug. It led to a small, cold cellar where he stored his supplies. He slipped down into the darkness, pulling the door closed over his head. The cellar was cramped and smelled of earth and potatoes. But on the far wall, behind a stack of firewood, was another, smaller door. A bolt hole. He'd dug it himself his first year here. A way out, just in case. It opened up into a thicket of pine trees 50 feet behind the cabin. He unbolted the door and pushed it open a crack. The cold air hit his face. Through the tangle of branches he could see the torches. He could see the men moving in the darkness. They were gathering for an assault on the front of the cabin just as he'd predicted. They had no idea he was already behind them. He took his Winchester, a handful of extra cartridges, and slipped out into the night like a ghost. The deep snow muffled his footsteps. The darkness was his ally. He circled wide, moving through the trees, his eyes fixed on the ring of firelight. He saw Cale directing his men. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face grim in the torchlight. With him were a dozen Apache warriors, armed mostly with bows and knives. But separate from them, huddled together, were 4 other men, white men. They were rough-looking, dressed in heavy winter coats, all of them carrying new-looking rifles, mercenaries, hired guns. One of them turned, and the firelight caught his face. Samuel's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt and spin. The air was punched from his lungs. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. But there was no mistaking that face, the jagged scar that ran down his left cheek. The dead, cold eyes. The man's name was Jedediah Kane. He was the man Samuel had put away 5 years ago, the leader of a gang of cutthroats who worked for the big land barons, terrorizing settlers off their claims. Samuel had been a U.S. Marshal then. He'd gone undercover, joined their crew, gathered the evidence. His testimony had sent Kane and his whole gang to prison for life. Or so he'd thought. And then he remembered the fire, the smoke. Coming home to find his farmhouse burned to the ground. The sheriff had told him it was a terrible accident, a stray ember from the hearth, Rachel and the baby, trapped inside. The fever. That was the story the town doctor had settled on. Easier than telling a man his wife and child had burned to death. But it wasn't the fever. It wasn't an accident. It was them. It was Kane. They had gotten out, or someone had gotten them out, and they had come for his family. They had murdered them. He hadn't run away from grief. He'd run away because he was a coward. He'd known deep down that it wasn't an accident. But he'd been so broken, so terrified, that he'd accepted the lie. He had run and hidden, letting his family's killers believe he was dead too. And now, fate, or God, or the devil himself, had brought the monster who had destroyed his life right back to his doorstep. This was no longer about Ayana. This was no longer about protecting his home. This was about vengeance. A cold, clear rage settled over Samuel. All the pain, all the grief, all the guilt of the last 5 years solidified into a single sharp point of purpose. He raised the Winchester to his shoulder. He rested the barrel on the branch of a snow-heavy pine. He looked down the sight, past the Apache warriors, past the other hired guns. He put the iron sight right on Jedediah Kane's heart. He was about to pull the trigger, to end it all right there, when he saw something that made him pause. Cale was arguing with Kane. The two men were face to face, their voices low and angry. Cale pointed at the cabin, then shook his head. Kane laughed, a nasty, sharp sound, and pushed Cale back. The Apache warrior's hand went to the knife at his belt. Kane's men raised their rifles. The other Apache warriors drew their bows, arrows aimed at the mercenaries. The alliance was breaking. They were about to kill each other. Samuel lowered his rifle. This was better. Let them tear each other apart. He slipped back into the trees, circling around to a different position. He needed to help things along. He found a spot behind a large rock outcropping that gave him a clear view of the mercenaries, but kept Cale's men mostly shielded. He raised the rifle again. This time, he didn't aim for Kane. He aimed for the man standing next to him. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The shot echoed through the valley like a clap of thunder. One of the mercenaries spun around, a dark hole appearing in his chest, and fell face first into the snow. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. Then, chaos erupted. Kane, thinking Cale's men had shot his man, let out a roar of rage and fired his own rifle. But he didn't shoot at the cabin. He shot the Apache warrior standing closest to him. That was all it took. The night became a whirlwind of arrows and bullets. The Apache warriors, betrayed, launched a volley of arrows at the mercenaries. The mercenaries, caught by surprise, fired wildly into the trees. Samuel worked the lever on his Winchester, firing again and again. He wasn't shooting to kill the Apache. He was targeting the mercenaries, picking them off one by one from the darkness. He was a ghost, a phantom sniper turning their own greed and violence against them. Another mercenary went down, clutching his leg and screaming. Kane, realizing they were being attacked from the woods, started shouting orders, trying to get his men to take cover. But it was too late. Kyle and his warriors were pressing their attack, moving through the trees like wraiths, their knives flashing in the torchlight. They were fighting for their honor now, betrayed by the white men they had foolishly trusted. Samuel saw Kane take a hit. An arrow sprouted from his shoulder. He staggered back, his face a mask of shock and pain. He fired his rifle blindly and then turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness, leaving his last remaining man to be overwhelmed by the warriors. The fight was over in less than a minute. The snow around the cabin was stained with blood. The Apache warriors stood, breathing heavily, among the bodies of the mercenaries. Kyle stood over the last dead gunman, his face grim. He looked at his own fallen warrior, then looked towards the cabin. Samuel knew this wasn't over. He had eliminated one threat, but he had only confirmed Cale's belief that he was a dangerous enemy. He slipped back through the trees, making his way to the cellar entrance. He had to get back inside before Cale reorganized his men for another attack. He slid back into the cellar, bolting the door behind him. He climbed back into the cabin. Ayana was still by the hearth, the revolver held tightly in her hands. Her eyes were wide. "What happened?" she whispered. "It sounded like a war." "It was," Samuel said, reloading his rifle. "Your chief's friends turned on each other." He didn't tell her about Kane. He didn't tell her that this was now his war, too. That would come later, if they survived the night. "They're not finished yet," he said, moving back to the window. "Phase 1 is over. Now Cale will come for us." He looked out into the night. The torches were moving again. The warriors were regrouping. They were no longer surrounding the cabin. They were gathering for a single, overwhelming assault. They had lost men. They had lost face. Now, they would come for blood. "He will not use tricks now," Ayana said, her voice low. "He will come straight at the door. He will try to overwhelm us with sheer numbers." "I'm counting on it," Samuel said. He looked around the small, warm cabin. This place had been his tomb for 5 years. Tonight, it would either be his grave or the place where he was reborn. He looked at Ayana. She met his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. There was no fear left in them, only a cold, hard resolve. They were two broken people pushed to the edge, and they had decided to push back. The wolf howl echoed through the valley again, but this time, it wasn't a signal. It was a war cry. Samuel raised his rifle. "Stay behind me," he said. The sound of footsteps, running, crunching in the snow, grew louder and louder. They were coming. The attack was a wave of silent, deadly fury. Kale's warriors didn't scream or yell. They moved like shadows, a dozen of them rushing the cabin from the front, their goal simple and brutal: break down the door. A heavy log, carried by 4 men, slammed into the door with a sound like a thunderclap. The whole cabin shook. The heavy oak door groaned, the iron hinges shrieking in protest, but it held. Samuel fired the Winchester through a small firing slit he'd cut next to the door. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. A cry of pain answered from outside, but they didn't stop. The log slammed against the door again. Wood splintered. "They're going to break through!" Ayana shouted. She stood behind him, the shotgun raised, its wide barrel aimed at the door. "Get ready!" Samuel yelled back. He worked the lever on his rifle, chambering another round. The log hit a 3rd time, and with a terrible crack, the doorframe shattered. The door burst inward, ripped from its hinges, and crashed to the floor. For a split second, the doorway was filled with the night, with snow, and with the silhouettes of men. Then they poured in. The first warrior through the door held a hatchet. He saw Samuel and charged. Samuel didn't have time to aim his rifle. He fired from the hip. The blast threw the warrior backward into the man behind him. Ayana fired the shotgun. The roar was immense, and the blast of buckshot cleared the doorway, sending 2 more men reeling back into the snow, screaming. But there were too many. Another warrior leaped over the bodies, a long knife in his hand. He was on Samuel before he could chamber another round. The 2 men crashed to the floor, wrestling for control of the knife. Samuel felt the cold steel slice across his arm. Pain, hot and sharp, flared through him. He grunted, using his weight to roll them over, smashing the warrior's head against the stone hearth. The man went limp. He looked up just as another warrior grabbed Ayana from behind, his arm wrapped around her throat. Her shotgun lay on the floor. "No!" Samuel roared. He scrambled for his revolver, but it was too far. Then he saw Kale. The war leader stepped through the shattered doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. He held a pistol in his hand, and it was aimed right at Samuel's chest. The fight was over. They had lost. "It is done," Kale said in broken English. He gestured with his pistol. "Drop the rifle." Samuel let the Winchester clatter to the floor. He slowly raised his hands. "The woman comes with us," Kale said. "She will face the tribe's justice." "Let her go," Samuel said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between you and me." Kale laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You are nothing, a ghost who was already dead." He walked towards Ayana, his eyes filled with a fanatic's certainty. "She brought this curse upon our people. She brought the white man's poison to our lands." "He's the poison, Kyle!" Ayana choked out, struggling against the warrior holding her. "Black Horse! He is the one who betrayed you. He brought the mercenaries. He is selling our future for guns." "Lies!" Kale snarled. "The lies of a dishonored woman." He raised his hand to strike her, and in that moment, Samuel saw his chance. Kale was distracted. The warrior holding Ayana was focused on his leader. Samuel lunged, not for Kale, but for the fireplace. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from its stand, the end of it still glowing red from the fire. He spun around, the poker swinging in a searing arc. The warrior holding Ayana screamed as the hot iron laid open his cheek. He stumbled back, releasing her. Ayana didn't hesitate. She dove for the shotgun, scooped it up, and turned it on Kyle. Kyle, shocked, fired his pistol. The shot went wide, burying itself in the ceiling. He was fast, but Samuel was faster. Samuel brought the heavy poker down on Kyle's wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The pistol fell from his nerveless fingers. Kyle cried out in pain, clutching his shattered hand. The other warriors in the cabin, seeing their leader disabled, hesitated. "It's over, Kyle!" Samuel shouted, advancing on him, the poker held like a weapon. "You've been lied to. That man, Cain, he's the one Black Horse made a deal with. I know him. He's a murderer. He killed my family." The words poured out of him, the confession he had kept buried for 5 years. Kyle stared at him, his face a mixture of pain and confusion. "Lies," he whispered. But the certainty was gone from his voice. He had seen the mercenaries turn on his men. He had seen the kind of men they were. "Black Horse cares nothing for the tribe," Ayana said, her voice ringing with truth. She stepped forward, the shotgun still aimed at Kyle's chest. "He cares only for power. He sold you out. He sold us all out. Ask yourself, Kale, where did he get the money for so many rifles? From the railroad. From the men who want to drive us from these mountains forever." The remaining warriors looked at each other, then at their wounded leader. Doubt was spreading through them like a disease. They were men of honor, and Ayana's words struck a chord of truth. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the darkness outside. Kyle jerked, a look of surprise on his face. A small dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. He staggered forward, then collapsed onto the floor. Everyone froze. Standing in the shattered doorway, half hidden in the shadows, was Jedediah Cain. His face was pale, his shoulder bloody where the arrow had hit him. He was holding a smoking revolver. "Always cleaning up other people's messes," Cain rasped, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He stepped into the cabin, his eyes landing on Samuel. "Richardson, I knew I smelled a rat. Should have known you wouldn't be easy to kill." The remaining Apache warriors, seeing the man who had betrayed them, let out a collective cry of rage and charged. Cain just laughed. He wasn't alone. 2 more mercenaries stepped into the doorway behind him, their rifles raised. They opened fire. The cabin became a slaughterhouse. The warriors, armed only with knives and hatchets, stood no chance against the repeating rifles at close range. In seconds, it was over. The floor was littered with bodies. Only Samuel and Ayana were left. "See?" Cain said, stepping over Kale's body. "That's how you deal with problems. Quick, permanent." He looked at Samuel, his eyes burning with a cold, old hatred. "You took everything from me, Marshal. My freedom, my crew. Now, I get to return the favor. I already took your wife and kid. That was just business. This is personal." He raised his revolver, aiming it at Samuel's head. Ayana, standing slightly behind Samuel, made a small, almost imperceptible move. Cain's eyes flickered towards her for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Samuel would get. He kicked out, sending a small wooden stool skittering across the floor. It collided with Cain's leg, throwing off his aim just as he fired. The bullet whistled past Samuel's ear. Samuel dove forward, tackling Cain around the waist. They crashed to the floor, rolling over and over, punching, kicking, 2 men locked in a primal struggle. The other 2 mercenaries raised their rifles. But before they could fire, Ayana brought the shotgun up. She pulled both triggers. The blast was catastrophic. The 2 men were lifted off their feet and thrown back out into the snow. Now it was just Samuel and Cain. Cain was strong, fueled by hatred. He managed to get on top of Samuel, his hands wrapping around Samuel's throat. Samuel's vision started to go dark. Black spots danced in front of his eyes. "This is for my men!" Cain snarled, his face inches from Samuel's. "This is for 5 years in a cage!" Samuel's hands scrabbled on the floor, searching for a weapon. His fingers closed around something hard and sharp. A knife, dropped by one of the fallen warriors. With the last of his strength, he drove the knife up, deep into Cain's side. Cain screamed, a high, thin sound of agony and surprise. His grip loosened. Samuel shoved him off, gasping for air. Cain staggered to his feet, clutching his side, blood pouring between his fingers. He looked down at the knife buried in his gut, then back at Samuel, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You," he choked out. Samuel got to his feet. He was battered, bleeding, but he was alive. He looked at the man who had haunted his every waking moment for 5 years, the monster from his nightmares, and he felt nothing, no satisfaction, no joy, just a vast empty coldness. "It's over, Cain," Samuel said. Cain stumbled backward, tripping over a body. He fell against the wall, then slid to the floor, leaving a smear of blood on the logs. He looked at Samuel, a strange gurgling sound coming from his throat. And then he was still. Silence descended on the cabin. A heavy, profound silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Samuel stood there, breathing heavily, looking at the carnage. He had won. He had gotten his revenge. But he didn't feel like a victor. He just felt tired. Ayana came to his side, her hand gently touching his bleeding arm. "Samuel," she whispered, "it is over." He looked at her strong, beautiful face, smudged with soot and streaked with tears, and the coldness inside him began to recede. The emptiness began to fill. He had lost his first family to this man's evil, but he had just fought for his second. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest. They stood there for a long time, two survivors in a room full of ghosts, holding on to each other as the first pale light of dawn began to creep over the snow-covered mountains. The war was over, and a new life was just beginning. They buried the dead as the sun rose higher, casting a cold, clean light on the blood-soaked snow. It was grim work. They laid the Apache warriors to rest with what little dignity they could, facing the east, according to the traditions Ayana described in a quiet, solemn voice. Kyle. They wrapped in a blanket, his face peaceful in death, a man of honor who had died for a lie. The mercenaries they dragged into the woods and left for the scavengers. They did not deserve the dignity of a grave. By noon, it was done. The cabin was a wreck, the door shattered, the walls pocked with bullet holes. But it was standing. They were alive. They spent the rest of the day cleaning, scrubbing the blood from the floorboards, patching the walls as best they could. They worked in silence, the horror of the night still hanging heavy between them. That evening, they sat by the fire, the silence stretching. "He is dead," Samuel said finally, breaking the quiet. "The man who killed my family. He's dead." "Does it bring you peace?" Ayana asked softly. Samuel considered the question. He had dreamed of that moment for 5 years, dreamed of revenge. But now that it was done, the satisfaction he'd expected wasn't there. There was just a hollow ache. "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It doesn't bring them back. Nothing will." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain she knew all too well. "I ran, Ayana. After they died, I ran. I was a coward. I should have hunted him down then." "You were a man drowning in grief," she said, her hand finding his. "You did what you had to do to survive. You came here to heal. There is no shame in that." "And you?" he asked. "What will you do now? Black Horse is still out there." "His power came from Kale and his warriors," she said. "They are gone. The men who return to the tribe will tell the truth of what happened here. They will tell of his betrayal. His rule is over. My people will be free of him." "Will you go back?" he asked, a knot of fear tightening in his stomach at the thought of her leaving. She looked around the small, damaged cabin. "My home was taken from me. My family is gone. My people cast me out." She turned her gaze back to him, her dark eyes searching his. "You are my people now, Samuel. This is my home." The words filled the hollow space in his chest. He reached out, his hand gently touching her face, tracing the line of her jaw. "I almost lost you," he whispered. "We saved each other," she corrected softly. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he said, the admission feeling like he was tearing a part of himself open. "Then you will not be," she replied. Their first kiss wasn't like the ones in storybooks. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce, desperate. The kiss of two people who had stared into the abyss and pulled each other back. It was a promise, a vow, a declaration that they would not be defined by their ghosts, but by the life they would build together from the ashes. Spring came, and with it, a sense of renewal. The snow melted, revealing the green life that had been sleeping underneath. Together, they rebuilt the cabin. They replaced the shattered door with a new one, made of thick, strong pine. They patched the bullet holes one by one. They didn't try to hide the scars. They were a part of their home now, a part of their story. They planted a garden. Samuel tilled the soil, and Ayana planted seeds of corn, beans, and squash, singing quiet songs in her native tongue as she worked. Life returned to the small homestead. In May, they rode down to the town of Millbrook. The townsfolk stared at the strange couple, the silent mountain man they all thought was half mad with grief, and the beautiful, proud Apache woman at his side. Samuel didn't care. Let them stare. They were married by a traveling judge in the town's tiny church. Samuel wore his only suit, and Ayana wore a simple blue dress he'd bought for her at the general store. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her, and for the first time in over 5 years, he felt a pure, uncomplicated joy. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. That summer, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, Ayana gave him the news. "I am with child," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. The world stopped. Samuel stared at her, unable to speak. The curse, the medicine man's words, Chief Black Horse's lies. "Are you sure?" he finally managed to ask, his voice thick. "I am sure," she said, a radiant smile on her face. "A new life, a new beginning. A gift from the spirits, to replace what was stolen from us." He fell to his knees in front of her, pressing his ear to her belly, trying to hear the impossible miracle of a heartbeat. He wrapped his arms around her, overcome. "A child," he whispered, the word a prayer. "Our child." The baby was born in the deep of winter, during a gentle, quiet snowfall. It was just the two of them in the cabin, the same cabin where she had collapsed, dying, only a year before. He was a boy, healthy and strong, with his mother's dark, intelligent eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Samuel held his son, his hands shaking. The grief for the first son he had lost would always be there, a scar on his soul. But this new life didn't erase that pain. It made room for new love to grow alongside it. "What shall we name him?" Ayana asked, exhausted but glowing. Samuel looked down at the tiny, perfect face. "Thomas," he said softly. "His name is Thomas." Ayana smiled. "A good name, a strong name." Later that night, as the baby slept peacefully in a cradle Samuel had carved, he looked at his wife. The firelight danced on her face. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, the same sound he had heard the night she arrived. "You kept your promise," he said suddenly. She looked at him, confused. "What promise?" "That night, in the snow. You said you would reward me if I let you in." Ayana's smile was full of a wisdom as old as the mountains themselves. "And have I not?" "You have given me everything," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "You have given me my life back." "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. The woman who had stumbled out of the storm, barefoot and dying, had brought a war to his door. She had forced him to face the monster he had been running from his entire life. But she had also brought him salvation. In saving her, he had finally, truly, saved himself. This story shows that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting or winning, but in opening your door to a stranger, in choosing compassion when the world has taught you to choose fear. What would you have done if you were Samuel? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of survival, hope, and the strength of the human heart.